So, hello and welcome to this episode of the Curiosity Key podcast, where I'm joined with Lena Gothberg from the Shipping Podcast. Welcome, Lena. I'm so happy to have you here.
Thank you, Charlie. I'm honored to be one of your guests.
Now, Lena is no newbie to the podcasting world, as she has the Shipping Podcast, which has got now over 110 episodes. And was it 2013 or 2015 that you started it?
2015. In the summer of 2015, I started my Shipping Podcast.
So tell me, what prompted you to start the Shipping Podcast?
Well, basically, that's a long story, but I had the task to reunite an organization, and they told me to try and to make the brand more popular and attract more members and so on, but they didn't give me any marketing budget. So I decided to try and understand all about social media and online communication, because my time was paid. So I paid a lot of attention to conferences where people hanged out who were interested in online communication. And there someone started to talk about podcasting. And I immediately thought, well, podcasting, that's storytelling. That must be something for the maritime industry. So I started to think about and say to everyone, someone should start a podcast about shipping, because there is so much to talk about when it comes to shipping and the maritime industry. And after having said that for a year, someone told me, are you going to talk about it or are you going to do it? So that meant that I started to investigate how to do this and what was the best way to do it and so on. And I signed up for an online course from the United States called Podcasting School for Women. Because in the United States, most podcasters are men. And if there are any women who are podcasting, they are usually talking about more soft values, but not business. So that is why two of my now mentors started Podcasting School for Women, and I signed up. It was me and 19 women from the United States.
Wow. And now we've got two female podcasters talking about podcasting.
I am so happy about that.
I love it, because I met you. So I used to work in the shipping industry, but I was new to the shipping industry when I joined. And I met Lena as part of the Worcester Women in Shipping networking group, because I wanted to get to know more sort of women in leadership roles in the shipping industry. And can you tell us a little bit about what it is that you do with Worcester?
Well, I have been a member of WISTA, which is the Women's International Shipping and Trading Association, for almost 20 years. So I was born there. No, but I have been a member for a very long time. And I used to be the president of WISTA in Sweden, because I'm based in Sweden, in Gothenburg, long time ago. And last year I was asked to set up the virtual offices of WISTA International, because now we are 45 countries with 3,000 members. So we need to get hold of the processes and websites and whatever to try and promote the brand of Vista. And that is what I do partly.
And that was one of the things that I loved about you, was your energy and real sort of passion and drive to raise the profile, not only of the industry, but also of women in the industry. Because, especially when I was working there, women in leadership roles, especially in shipping, wasn't commonplace. So it was great to see people and individuals like yourself that were pioneering that and promoting it further. And it was great to see as well that you've got 50 out of your 110 podcasting guests are women as well.
Yes, I set up a goal for myself when I started. I'm the lazy type, so I started to think, how do I start this podcast? And decided to have the same 5 questions to everyone. And for myself, I set a goal to have 50% female guests. I didn't really believe in it myself at that time, but I'm close now. And it's like 47% or something like that. And I think it's great, because I've given, first of all, the shipping industry a platform to speak about the exciting things that we are doing in the maritime industry, but also for the women. I give them a platform to speak up. And whenever I meet a new interviewee, someone who is a little bit nervous, maybe, who hasn't been behind a microphone before, I always tell them that just relax. We are going to do this. I want you to be a sea star, a star of the sea. And then they sort of relax and think it's great. And I get so much good feedback from people saying, wow, it's interesting to listen to all these women. They got something to say.
It's funny that, isn't it?
Yeah.
Very strange. And do you find that so not just the women, but do you find most people approach you to be a guest on your podcast, or do you have to go out and find them?
That took 2 years. So in 2 years' time, you will also experience that people are approaching you. No, that will probably happen before that, Charlie, because you are a little bit different than I am, and working in a different industry. But yeah, it took me 2 years before their marketing people started to approach me. They wanted to pitch their CEOs or someone else to be on my podcast. And well, as long as I am in charge, I'm deciding if they are going to be guests or not.
I love it. So they have to get past your "Are you interesting enough to be on my podcast" filter.
Yes.
I love it. So just going back onto shipping and the maritime industry. Now, there is a difference between shipping and maritime, isn't there? Because we were having a chat about some of the misconceptions in the industry and the fact that people get the two confused. So can you tell us a little bit more about that from your point of view?
Yeah, that is... it could be how long is a shoestring in a way. But shipping, I would say, is the ship and the ships and the ship owners and what's close to the actual boat, ship. And the maritime industry is a little bit wider because that also includes ports and all of the other things that is happening to get that goods on a keel somewhere.
Absolutely. And it is, as you said, it's an absolutely fascinating industry because I was only really part of it for about a year. I came in as a complete newbie, never been involved in the shipping industry, apart from working in logistics, doing the actual shipping myself. But it really opened my eyes because up until then, I never knew what was actually going on. I think I just thought, it's just ships moving goods and cargo from one place to another, or people going on cruises and doing things. So why is it important to you to raise the profile of the industry?
Just because of what you just said. No one knows about us. We are the Cinderella. No one knows about us, but we are doing so much heavy lifting in everyday life. I mean, whatever you see around you, whatever you eat, it's probably at one point been on a keel, on a ship. Because, I mean, in Sweden, we don't grow wine, for instance, but we drink the wine, so we have to get it here. Whatever you see around you, what is produced in your own neighborhood is not much. It's more coming from other parts of the world. And for instance, I live in Sweden. We got the longest coast in the EU, and we are heavily a country which exports a lot of paper and timber and all of that. And we couldn't do that without the shipping industry. Also, if you think about, for instance, heating, whatever energy there is, 60% of everything that is actually goods that is transported is energy in one form or another. It's oil, it's coal, it's gas. So far we haven't reached that far with sun and wind, but every other kind of energy is transported on a ship.
And shipping is actually a more sustainable form of transport anyway. Everybody focuses on shipping goods via air, which is a bit of a weird way of talking about things, isn't it? You're shipping a parcel via air to somebody else. It doesn't actually touch the sea, which I always thought was a really interesting way that people talk about shipping. So shipping via the sea is a much more sustainable form of transport than using air. And I think a lot of people don't necessarily consider that, do they?
And less expensive. because it's very expensive to send goods via airplane compared to a ship.
Yeah, for sure. And it's that kind of like time versus quality versus cost and things like that, isn't it? So
yeah, very complicated. There are experts on logistics and how to be the most efficient when it comes to transport. I'm not one of them.
I do have to say, I think like my maths and engineering side of me gets a bit geeky when they start looking at, the comparisons and statistics around it. And then I have to kind of stop myself getting lost in all of that, going, oh, that's really, really interesting.
Yeah, and there are so many new things coming into the maritime industry. And I get so excited because I see that the new things that is coming in is brought in by young women. For instance, blockchain, all of that is coming into our industry. 3D printing, how will that affect our industry? And autonomous ships. I mean, we're talking about autonomous cars, but there's also a discussion going on when it comes to autonomous ships. And there are a lot of women in there. And that makes me happy. And I try to interview them all.
What do you think it is that draws women into those sorts of technologies? Do you have any thoughts on that?
I think there is some change when it comes to young women studying for engineer and mathematics. It's not enough. We should have more. But there are so many. I mean, you start from scratch if you enter into the maritime industry, and you can make a career because there's not a lot of people who knows what you're talking about, and you don't have that much competition. So in a way, young women who are engineers should definitely enter the maritime industry.
Definitely. I would, if you have anybody to recommend to come on this podcast and talk about autonomous ships, then I would absolutely love to interview them because autonomous vehicles, autonomous ships is something I'm quite interested in, especially from a sustainability side of things, because I know that the company that I worked for in the past, it was all about reducing the amount of sulfur that was entered into the air, which I know is kind of it's a bit of a boring topic, isn't it? But it's so important when looking at climate change.
And I got the perfect candidate for you, I promise you.
Wonderful.
And also, I live in Gothenburg, and that is the head office of Volvo. So we have a lot of discussions, and I attend a lot of seminars when it comes to autonomous cars. And they are testing in this city. It's interesting.
Oh, brilliant. I love it. I think, because I used to be involved in laser scanning technologies, not so much in autonomous cars, but I was always looking at that industry, wondering how could I apply what I was doing to that industry, just from an interest point of view, because I find it absolutely fascinating.
Yeah, I do attend a lot of seminars when it comes to digitalization and the fourth industry revolution and all of that, what comes with it, that what is happening on land, because that will also happen at sea at one point. And that is why I'm so interested and so into that.
Absolutely, absolutely. Do you think that the shipping industry is lagging behind any other particular industry?
I don't know. Yeah, maybe. I mean, the ships, it's always cutting edge engineering, and it has always been because of where the interest is but digitalization, we haven't reached that far. But name an industry that has, newspapers and maybe the record industry. I don't know, but we are a little bit behind. But I think also maybe we are thinking about it before we take action.
And I think it's good to think about things and assess what's going on. And I think that's why I've always loved conferences and seminars, because then you can have those important conversations and see what's going on. And I think there are so many conferences and seminars in the shipping industry. It's kind of hard to keep up to date with what's going on and when. So how important do you think it is to be attending these seminars?
Well, I think you should from time to time, but maybe not all of them.
And how do you have any tips on how people should be selective as to what seminars they should attend? Because I can imagine that our listeners would benefit from this, because this is the same in any industry, really, isn't it?
Depends on what you want to achieve, I think. So are you there to learn yourself, or are you there to meet people, or are you there to do something else? So you have to make up your own mind before you decide where to go. Also, I mean, podcasting, I think, is maybe a competitor to the seminars. Because if you can listen whenever you want instead of attending a seminar when they are offering in time and place, then yeah, so we are competing.
I know, I think I've always wondered why more conferences and seminars aren't recorded and made available as podcasts after the event. I'm kind of hoping that at some point that will be the case, because there's a lot of digital courses and digital recordings and things like that, but not necessarily podcasting. So,
but I think it's a difference, because you can have a live podcast like we do now. We have a conversation and people will be able to see it and they will be able to understand it. But I have listened to recordings from seminars when people are presenting from a PowerPoint, and it's so hard to understand what they're talking about, because they're sort of pointing to the PowerPoint and they are referring to the PowerPoint and you can't see it. So you don't really understand. And they can try and explain a pie chart and you can't understand that. So it's a little bit different.
You know what? I actually think that if presenters knew that their talk was going to be a podcast afterwards, that would actually encourage them to move away from using detailed slides and detailed PowerPoints. I've sat through so many talks at seminars and conferences, and it's incredible how many people still just have slides full of information and then just talk everybody through what's on screen, and you can see the crowd have just got no engagement at all with it.
I totally agree. And also you could see all the people who are sitting there reading their emails. They could be in their offices reading their emails instead.
I know, you just think it's a crying shame, don't you? You're just like, why have you come all of this way to this conference to not speak to the people around you, to not pay attention to who's presenting? And yeah, again, I think that's why I like podcasts as well, because you can, you've got the attention of the people that are listening. And they're not, you hope that they're not on the phone and trying to do other things at the same time.
It's totally different. And I think coming through your ears hits your heart and your brain in another way, in a different way than it does when you are watching something and so on.
But just to, I think, recover what you said there, because there are two really, really good tips for our listeners there, which is, if you're going to a conference or a seminar, or you're looking at events to go to, really, spend that time and understand, what do you want to gain from it? What are your objectives from going? I see so many people going to conferences and events and just kind of making it up as they go along, or just going to see what happens. Yeah, they're an incredible networking opportunity, aren't they? I think, we had a chat virtually, and then we met at, was it North Shipping in Oslo?
Yes, it was.
Yeah. So it's like, have an objective, go and seek people out and find them and have real face-to-face conversations with them, because it's really, really important. And then another tip, if you are presenting at a conference or doing any kind of presenting, don't fall into that trap of putting all of your information on the slides and then just boring your audience to tears, because you're just going to lose their engagement and lose their energy and enthusiasm for coming to speak to you in the first place.
Could we give some tip to the organizers as well?
Yeah.
Well, please don't have any manels, that is, all male panels. But make sure that you include at least one, or maybe two or three or four women on your panels.
I think that's the same. That it's not just in the shipping industry. I used to spent a long period of time in the mining industry, and that was exactly the same, if not, dare I say it, worse. So, for any event organisers or anybody that's influencing event organisers, what tips would you give them based on your own experiences getting podcast interviewees to actually feature these women and get interesting, relevant, and high-profile people on the panels?
Well, that's the usual excuse, is there are no women. Well, I have now proven them wrong by presenting at least 50 women, and I am not finished yet. And what we have decided at Vista International level, we have decided to make a list of women who are specialists in different areas and present that to the organizers, because it shouldn't be an excuse to say we can't find them, or they said no, all of them. So that's another tip for people who are listening in here. Don't say no. Say yes to things and just take a chance and see what happens. Because
That is amazing
what
advice.
would be the worst thing that could happen to you?
That's amazing advice. And it's something that I say a lot, is just, take a chance, because what is the worst that could happen? And also, if you feel uncomfortable speaking in front of large audiences, or if you feel uncomfortable being on a podcast interview, just, the only way that you're going to start feeling comfortable is to just do it. Get involved. I know I had my first speaking opportunity in front of 700 people last year, and I have never been so nervous in my life. But I knew that unless I put myself in that situation, I was never going to conquer that fear, and I was never going to do it anyway. So
my advice in that, when you're in that situation, is that no one else knows what you're going to say but you.
mm-hmm.
So you are the only one who knows if you forgot something.
Absolutely. And it's, be confident with your own abilities and in your own voice, because nobody knows what you do. And somebody gave me some great advice, which was that the feeling of a fear is if you tell yourself that instead of being afraid, you're actually excited, the actual feeling is the same, but you just interpret it in slightly different ways. So the feeling of nerves and anxiety. So if you tell yourself, I'm not afraid, I'm not anxious, I'm excited, then you can really reframe that in your mind, and it helps set you up for putting yourself out there.
That's great advice.
Yeah, I know. I was like, attribute that to my friend who was really, really supportive before my presentation, because I was pacing the hall, getting really stressed out, like going, oh my days, what happens if, what happens if this? And she just said to me, she was like, well, what happens if it goes down really well? And what happens if, you have a great time and everybody loves it? So it was a good experience. And I tell this to a lot of people now, and I get told that it's helpful as well. But what you said before as well about being confident in your own knowledge, that is an interesting one, because I always suggest to a lot of B2B companies, especially in the shipping industry and any technical industry, is that you find that everybody has this curse of knowledge, where they have all of this knowledge and understanding, and they presume that their market and that everybody else knows what it is that they know. And I've never found that to be the case. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think you're right. I think I have experienced that. And also, to cover it all up, they use they use a language no one understands. I hate abbreviations, because who would know these abbreviations outside our own little bubble and circle? So I think it's important to at least once say it out, all the words, and then you can say, this is the abbreviation of that. Listen, I can't speak English anymore. And then you can maybe use that lingo or the language. But that is also a barrier, I think, to exclude people, to use a language that no one understands. It's sort of a trade language, or whatever you would call it.
Yeah, and I think as well, especially with shipping, with it being an international industry, is that you are targeting and interested in having conversations with people that aren't speaking the same mother tongue as you. So it's important to communicate clearly and not overwhelm somebody with the kind of technical jargon and the technical terminology that you're used to using. I think it was a marketing tip that I picked up years ago, which was to treat your audience like they have the intelligence of an 8-year-old.
I would say 4, but yeah, you're probably right.
Maybe the 4-year-olds in Sweden are a lot more intelligent, but it's true. And I find that when I, especially as my experience as a marketer was, as soon as I started to apply that to the way that I wrote emails, the way that I wrote copy for websites, social media, interviews, seminars, the easier you make it for people to understand, the more likely they are to remember what it is that you're saying and then take things away afterwards.
But it's so much harder to put things easy.
It is. And do you find that with your podcast interviewees, do they automatically go in talking, in industry jargon and industry terminology, or do you find that they're better prepared to speak in a way that more people would understand?
No, I think they're better prepared to speak in another language. Now and then I keep interrupting them and saying, "Oh, that is an abbreviation for," and then they say, "Yeah, yeah." Or I can say, maybe our audience who doesn't know that much about shipping would benefit if you explained what you're talking about a little bit more, or something like that. But I interview any people on that podcast. My last guest, he is working for a charity. He works for Mercy Ships, and he is the national director in Sweden. He doesn't know much about shipping. He comes from Volvo, and he's an IT expert from the start. But he has now taken on the responsibility to work for an international charity association. And we had a great time. And I can see from the statistics that people like it.
Yeah, and I think there's so much any industry can learn from bringing in outside expertise, for sure. So, how many people would you say that you've had on your podcast that have come from outside of the shipping industry?
Not a lot, maybe 80-20. I would say 20% non-mariners or non-shipping industry. So I need to go out and find people who have sort of a perspective from the outside into us. But my main point was, when I started this shipping podcast, I wanted people from outside to understand us. So in a way, I am bringing the maritime industry out to the rest of the world, because we have a tendency to just talk to each other and think we are all that. We are all that, but we need to tell everyone else that we are all that. So in a way, I think that has been important for me to show all the great people that I meet in this industry, to show them to the world. And I think maybe I have succeeded a little bit. It's downloaded in 165 countries now. It's a niche podcast, so it's not that many. It's about 6,000 people every month that is downloading, but that's great for me. I thought I was going to have to force my brother to listen, but I've got more people listening. But the most interesting thing is that when I look at the statistics, it's downloaded and listened to in the maritime hubs. So apparently, other maritime people are listening in to the other maritime. We're listening to each other.
Okay.
Which is interesting.
I think that was definitely my feeling when I was working in the shipping industry. It was a very closed community and a very tight-knit community, where everybody knew everybody else. Although I really didn't think that was unique. There's having come from the surveying industry, the mining industry, food, there's a lot of similarities in the behavior around networking. So how are you going to go about that challenge of wanting to get more people outside of the industry listening and taking notice beyond what it is that you're doing at the moment?
Well, I have a few guests on my target list. That would be great. We'll see what happens with that. It's so far-fetched, so I'm not quite sure that will happen. But I think that I gain more listeners by being out there in the real world myself, to attend conferences and deliver speeches and talk about my podcast and get other people to talk about it to people who doesn't really know about it. I get a lot of feedback from young people, from students in the shipping industry, and they have already taken the decision to start studying, but they write to me and they say, wow, now I understand that there is a whole world out there. If I just study and finish my studies, I can take part of that. I can change my work if I want to, because there's so many different occupations that you can have in the maritime industry.
It's a great tip, that I think, for anybody listening that is a young person that's a bit confused about what to do with their career, where to start, what companies to work with. Go to podcasts and learn about the industries and find out what interests you and what makes you more curious, and try and find out more. Use LinkedIn to connect with these people that are being interviewed and talking enthusiastically about what it is that they're doing. That's a great piece of advice.
To reach the top lists of the podcasting industry, but I'm not quite sure about that. There are too many algorithms that is that is dependent on, so I'm not sure about that.
Always trying to beat the algorithm. So why just like, I know we've talked about it a little bit, but why is it so important to you personally to get the message out about the shipping industry? And what are your goals around doing it?
I think I work in the most interesting industry there is. It's international, and it's about big values. It's about things that is moving around, and you never meet a dull person in the maritime industry. There is only personalities. They might be big or small, boring or interesting, but there are always personalities. So that is, I've been working in this industry for 25 years. I've been working with marine insurance. I've been insuring ships, and I've been working with business intelligence, and there are so many things that is influencing this industry. It's like steel prices, employment rates, macroeconomics, everything there is very important for this industry. And that, I think, makes it so interesting. And then I know so many great people, and I wanted the world to listen to them because they got the best and most interesting jobs. And I'd never heard about them. So why not present them to the world? That is what I wanted to do.
And I love that about you, because I think that's a very that's why I wanted to interview you on this podcast, because it's pretty much where I'm at. Like, I've worked across so many different industries and met so many wonderful human beings that are doing, amazing things. They're innovating, they're creating change, they're, doing things that nobody's aware of. And I just wanted to start this podcast to give people a voice to sort of share more about what it is that they're doing, and, try and attract a wider audience for people that might be interested to find out more. So in terms of your podcast, the shipping podcast, like, how do people find out more? And, what would you say is the, if you could give 3 reasons why somebody should listen to the shipping podcast, what would they be?
Because I'm interviewing interesting people with passion for their jobs and what they do. I have a website, shippingpodcast.com. I have made the largest play button there is, because there are so many analog people in my industry. They don't know how to listen to a podcast. So I have put up a website with a big play button. So if they can't do anything else, they can go to shippingpodcast.com, sit down and press play. That is probably what they can. But I've also put up instructions on how to download things if you have an Android phone or if you have an iOS phone. So there are different ways how you can reach that. But also, I'm on Spotify. Woohoo! I'm on Spotify. So Spotify is the platform that is good for both Android and iPhones. So that is not a problem then. If you go into Spotify, you can search for Shipping Podcast. And there you find me.
And are there any particular interviews or episodes that you would recommend that somebody start with, that you think would be a great place to start? Or just something that you think, if you're only going to listen to one episode, let that be it?
I think you should listen to episode 35 with Kate D. Adamson, the Blue Futurist. When I met Kate and interviewed her, that changed my mindset on how I was going to proceed with the shipping podcast. I'm not saying that the 34 ones before the 35th one is bad, but the 35, she's talking about the new mindset we need to have for the Industry Revolution 4.0. I would also like you to listen to my very first. The sound quality isn't that good, but it's with the captain of the container vessel Maersk McKinney Muller when she was on her Virgin trip from Asia to Gothenburg, actually. And he gave me a tour of the world's largest container ship at that time. And he's such a great guy. And if you want to listen to something about autonomous ships, and who I will recommend you to interview is Pia Meling. I cannot remember the number of that, but if you just search for Pia, Pia, you will find her.
I will definitely do that. And for anybody listening that's driving, moving around, thinking, I am not able to write any of this down, but I'm interested, just head over to my website, which is charliewhyman.com/podcast. And all of the show notes and links that we're talking about here will be included. So you've got easy access to all of this. And so have you, I just wanted to, we talked a lot about podcasting and also, helping people in the industry have a voice. Have you got any advice to anybody listening that might be interested in starting their own industry-specific podcast?
Yes, if they are women, they should actually become members of She Podcasts, like She Podcasts, where my mentors are actually very active. And they are Elsie Escobar and Jessica Kupferman. They are so great. And there is so much free stuff stuffed in there. If you just go to the Facebook group, She Podcasts, and look for units, there are so many free things there, how to set up a podcast and so on. But I would say start by thinking about your audience. Who is your audience? And what do you want to say to them? What do you want them to know about you? And so, what is your why? That is the most important thing. The technical stuff you can always pick up. And instead of planning for too long, just start. Everyone says that you will always hate the first 10 ones afterwards anyhow. So just start so that you reach the 11th one and feel comfortable and feel like, yeah, this is what I've done. I think the hard thing is to continue podcasting. It's not to start. That's not hard. The hard thing is to continue and also to be consistent. I think once you have, I have a loyal tribe of listeners now, and I have made them get used to that every other Friday there is a new episode of the Shipping Podcast. So I need to deliver. And it's up to me. So if I were thinking that, I don't have that time, maybe you should do it once a month, but do it on a day where you tell your listeners, this is the day that you have to listen, or you can download it. Maybe you don't have the time to listen at that time, but that is when you are releasing. So
there was so much great advice in what you've just said there. One thing I do want to pick up on, which is that, really understand who is your audience and what do you want to say to them. And that does not just apply to podcasting either. That applies to marketing, writing emails, sales, business development, business leadership, like everything. I would add one thing into that is who is your audience? What do you want to say to them? And also just bear in mind what they're interested in too, because somewhere in the middle between what you want to say and what they're interested in, that's the kind of like the sweet spot and the kind of the real sort of juicy bit that's going to engage and get them involved in the first place. And then exactly what you just said about that consistency side of things. I went into this podcast because you're actually my 9th episode. So I'm not quite at 10 yet. I'm absolutely loving doing it so far. And I've had some great feedback on the podcast at the moment. But yeah, my plan is to be consistent, to do a weekly interview. And it is true that getting started is the easy bit. It's continuing and building on that momentum. But it's, I think a lot of people get into that kind of perfectionism paralysis where, it's like, and I find myself doing that as well, because I talked about doing this podcast for over a year. And somebody said to me, it's just like, well, what's actually stopping you? And it was me. It was only me that was stopping me doing it because I wanted to figure out a way of making it perfect and right. And I was just like, you know what? Unless I get it going now, I'll never get it going.
Yeah, and you welcome to the club. I also thought about it for a year, and that was far too long, I think. I could
Yeah.
have started this earlier. It's so much fun.
It's a great way to expand your network as well, isn't it?
Yeah, definitely. I get so many doors opening for me now. And my tip is that when I interview someone, I ask them, who do you want to listen to? Who would you want to listen to? And then they give me a tip. And then after the interview, they usually say, oh, I can fix that up for you. I was like, oh my God, thank you.
Set it up for you as well. So that brings me nicely on to my next question, which is, if you could interview anybody in the world for your podcast, who would that be?
Sir Richard Branson.
Really? Sir Richard Branson. So if Sir Richard Branson is listening to this podcast right now, you can contact Lena.
I would be happy to discuss with him what he is thinking about, because he's started this Virgin Cruises, so he's getting into the maritime industry. I wouldn't say no to what's his name at Amazon, because everyone is asking me if I could make an interview with him.
Jeff Bezos.
I don't think that will happen either. But yeah, I'll stick to Sir Richard Branson.
That is a great tip. So just in terms of final remarks, just to confirm, if anybody wants to get in touch with you and connect with you, what is the best way of doing that?
Well, I am on social media. So my Twitter account is at Lena Gothberg, Gothberg. Or you can send an email to hello@shippingpodcast.com.
And I will include all of this information in the show notes, so you don't need to worry about noting that right down at the moment. I realise that I'm now like just rambling. Do you find that as well? At the end of your episodes, you just kind of forget how to speak?
No, I do that at the beginning. No, but I don't use the video, so I have an easier time to edit. I can edit.
Yes, I do make my life. I like to make my life challenging, but I think a lot of my audience have said that they like to watch interviews and not just listen to them. And also, I like to interview people when I can see them and see their reactions. I think for me that helps me interview. So I don't know, it just felt like it was the right thing to do.
Well, I usually travel to see my guests, so I sit down with them eye to eye in a room. And
perfect. Yes, that would have been challenging for us with you being in Sweden and me being in the UK.
Well, I was in the UK last week, so you never know. But it was good talking to you anyhow.
Yes, thank you so much for coming on the podcast. It's been an absolute pleasure to interview you. I could talk to you for ages about lots and lots of different topics. But thank you again. It's been an absolute pleasure.
Thank you, Charlie, and best of luck with your podcast, and welcome to the Podosphere.
Thank you. Thank you so much.